Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Kev Eley, and I run the enterprise business at Egress Software. And this afternoon, I'm going to talk about preventing data loss via email. In fact, I'm going to talk about how you can protect your people during the pandemic. And when I say protect your people, what I really mean is protecting them from themselves. So I've worked in cybersecurity for the last 12 years. And when I reflect back on the work that I've done, most of the work has been associated with helping organizations, particularly financial services organizations, protect themselves from cyber attacks from external threat adversaries. Whether those adversaries are nation states or organized criminal gangs or hacktivist type organizations, the work that I've done has specifically been helping information security teams within those organizations detect and respond to cyber attacks, whatever the motivation may be from the attacker. And as I reflect on the work that I've done, I recognize that the notion of an information security team pitting itself against an adversary is kind of the stuff of Hollywood type movies. Organized criminal gangs committing cybercrime, cyber conflicts, cyber war, cyber espionage. It's all really headline grabbing stuff when an organization is impacted by a cyber attack and it becomes public. Definitely gets a lot of media attention and is almost quite sexy. And I say this not to diminish the significance of cyber attacks. Clearly, when an organization is under a cyber attack from that type of adversary, it can be extremely, extremely serious. And as we've seen from cyber attacks over the last few years, it can cause a significant amount of financial harm, reputational damage to the organization in question. But as I think about those types of threats, I've recognized, particularly in working at Egress, that there is a wider threat that organizations face. And that threat is ultimately caused by an organization's employees, because an organization's employees handle sensitive information day in, day out. They're trusted by the organization to deal with that information. And yet, as we've seen, during the pandemic, employees are working from home. Employees potentially face distractions, as in this particular photo. I think anybody with any children can probably empathize with this situation, particularly when you look back during the spring and the summer, and not only were we working, but we were also becoming teachers and doing homeschooling. My kids are actually a little bit older than the boy in this photo, but I can still empathize with it. So, that's a scenario that I think organizations never anticipated. We didn't anticipate even a year ago that we would have a situation where employees would be working from home, doing their jobs, handling the confidential information that they handle time and time again without the protection of a perimeter. And of course, employees, we're all only human, and, we're fallible and we make mistakes. And, so when I consider this whole landscape of cyber security and cyber activity, I genuinely believe that employees represent a significant operational risk to financial services organizations. And I believe that operational risk will often manifest itself within an organization's email system, which is a conduit for sharing confidential information, often unstructured data that's confidential, out to external third parties. And perhaps tellingly, to the point I've just made, the Information Commissioner's Office recently released their Security Trends Report. And once again, it showed that misdirected emails was the top cause of reported incidents during the latest time period. So that's been the case for the last 6 months. And in fact, there were 44% more incidents involving misdirected emails than phishing attacks reported. And the financial services industry is not immune. It's one of the most affected sectors that face this particular type of problem, which shows that it's a challenge that must be addressed by the financial services industry. But at Egress, even before the ICO released this report, what we did was we wanted to understand the extent to which this was affecting organizations. And so we commissioned our own independent research over the summer to really look into how much of a problem operational risk in email systems was for organizations. We commissioned a third party to interview over 500 senior IT leaders in Europe and North America, and the results were quite staggering. What it showed us was that practically in all cases, well, in fact, in over 90% of cases, the businesses that we interviewed told us that they were sending more and more emails, and that email rate of the frequency of emails that they sent had increased during the pandemic. And a lot of that was caused by remote working and COVID-19. In half of those organizations, they'd experienced over a 50% increase in the volume of email traffic that they were sending. So by that nature, there's more and more emails that are being sent, and it stands to reason then that there's more and more sensitive information that's contained within those emails, which increases the likelihood of a data breach incident taking place, which again, perhaps references back to the ICO findings over the last 3 months as well. We were also extremely interested in the extent to which this was a problem for organizations and its implications for those organizations. And what we found was that it was a near universal problem for organizations. Over 90% of organizations told us that they had suffered an email data breach incident in the last 12 months. And it was almost an everyday occurrence. Practically every organization was experiencing an email data breach roughly once every 1.5 days. But for me, perhaps the most telling statistic that we gathered was that in a third of cases, there was some kind of financial loss event that was attributed to this email data breach. In fact, for me, reinforcing the significance of this to organizations and the actual cost this could cause to organizations, both in terms of financial considerations, but also from a reputational standpoint. And it stands to reason that given we're talking about email data breaches, people are very much at the center of this challenge. And operational risks in email systems within financial services organizations are, in fact, human generated. And so when we look at the types of operational risks in email systems that affect financial services organizations, well, there's a wide variety. So we've already talked about misdirected email and perhaps misreporting of information out to the wrong recipient. That is a constant challenge for organizations within financial services, where an employee handling sensitive information inadvertently sends that to the wrong person, and it happens time and time again. And I think we can all probably relate to that within our careers where we've all made that type of mistake. But there are a wide variety of other factors. So misuse of confidential information often crops up when we engage with financial services organizations. We see scenarios where within a financial services organization, perhaps a large investment bank, there is a research division and there is a trading division, and there needs to be an ethical war that's maintained between those two parts of the organization. And sensitive confidential information really should not travel between those two parts of the organization. So if it's accidentally sent or even deliberately sent, and it's found out, that can cause a huge organizational challenge from a regulatory standpoint, but also potentially even from a criminal standpoint as well. Business email compromise scans affect all organizations really, irrespective of the sector. But of course, within financial services, given the volume of sums that are involved within a financial services organization, they do represent a very juicy target for scammers. And so we do see time and time again, business email compromise as a challenge for organizations and an operational risk that needs to be addressed. Email still remains the #1 vector of attack for cybercriminals, or used by cybercriminals, and practically every single spear phishing campaign involves some level of account impersonation. And so account impersonations are another form of operational risk that we often see within email systems. Discrimination is an interesting one. There are obviously a number of cases in recent years that have affected financial services organizations where discrimination cases have been brought against them. And often the email systems are trawled through to find evidence either for the defendant or for the plaintiff. So again, if there's discriminatory language that's being used within an email communication, that does represent an operational risk to an organization, because if a discrimination case is proved against a financial services organization, then clearly there can be some form of financial settlement, and that can be linked back to some of the language that's perhaps been used within the email system. And lastly, and perhaps the classic operational risk, is the classic insider threat, where an individual employee perhaps goes rogue or becomes disgruntled and decides to steal information, sensitive information, from the organization for their own personal gain. And again, we see that crop up time and time again. So you can see that there's a wide variety of operational risks that exist within email systems. But I come back to the misdirected email because it is a constant challenge. And in fact, just even earlier this week, one of my colleagues within Egress received a communication from an independent organization where they mistakenly sent the colleague some very sensitive and confidential information relating to an HR matter. And that's, I mean, incredibly ironic if you think about what we do as an organization. To have a third party that we have no connection with accidentally send some information through us is perhaps unbelievable. But again, it just reinforced in my mind the significance of this challenge for organizations. Of course, we notified the sender that they'd sent this information to us, and we've taken steps to remove the email from our systems. But again, it just shows how much of a problem this is for organizations. And so organizations have tried to tackle these forms of operational risks within their email system. And what we've seen when we've engaged with organizations is that often they've tried to use legacy data loss prevention technologies to try and help them mitigate these risks. But really, it's practically impossible for these types of systems to solve the problem, particularly the problem of the misdirected email, because often these technologies are reliant on rules, and they're reliant on rules that need to be maintained by administrators within an organization. Well, if you think of any large financial services organization and the sheer number of emails that they're sending and the sheer number of recipients that they communicate with and the types of information that they need to send to those individuals, it's almost impossible for an individual administrator to be able to handle all of those types of static rules, to put these controls in place to say that certain messages shouldn't be sent to certain people, etc. It's completely unwieldy and almost a nightmare for them to try and manage, and just completely ineffective. It's like a sledgehammer to crack a nut, and it just really doesn't work. And also, it can't really solve the problem of the misdirected email because the rules simply can't be put in place to kind of prevent that type of activity from taking place. So at Egress, we do advocate an alternative approach to addressing operational risk in email systems. And that additional approach that we advocate is really around machine learning. We believe machine learning really does hold the key to help organizations reduce operational risks in their email system. And going back to the title of this talk, to really help protect an organization's people, both during the pandemic, but also beyond the pandemic as well. Because if you think about what machine learning can do, it can really understand a user's email behavior and email habits. And it can understand the types of content, the types of information, even sensitive information, that user normally handles. And what we can also do is understand extensively the types of communication patterns that user would normally exhibit. So we know who they normally communicate to, who they normally receive emails from, the groups that they send that information to, these kind of cliques. It's almost using the types of techniques that social media companies like Facebook and LinkedIn employ to understand those relationship patterns between individuals, both within their organization, but also outside of their organization as well. And so that's massively advantageous in being able to spot when a user is inadvertently, or maybe even deliberately, about to send information to the wrong person. But we can also build up a really fine-tuning picture of the way in which that user communicates and what their daily habits look like. You know, what time of day do they normally send and receive emails? Where do they send and receive emails from? What type of device do they use? And also, we can look into the content that's being sent, and we can look at the recipient that it's being sent to and almost form a last line of defense, particularly in the case of things like spear phishing attacks and emails, and make sure that the individual that they're sending it to is in fact the right individual and their account perhaps hasn't been spoofed. So there's a wide variety of different types of use cases that machine learning can address, particularly in relation to operational risks within an email system. Now, most financial services organizations that we work with, they're already employing machine learning. They're already employing AI to help with some of their business processes. And so we think it's only natural that the organization can really leverage a technology such as egress, where machine learning is built right into the platform, but completely designed to solve some of these challenges and these problems. And so that's why we think it's really important that organizations start to act now and really consider the applicability of this type of capability within their arsenal to protect their employees moving forward. And so as I draw this talk to a close, I want to make a series of recommendations, if I may, to you. So the first recommendation is really act now. Really understand, take the time to understand your exposure to operational risks within your email system. They are there. The evidence from the ICO, the independent research that we've undertaken, it demonstrates that organizations and financial services organizations in particular do have an exposure to this risk within their environment. So we think it's critical that organizations within the financial services sector take steps now to really understand what that risk represents in the context of your overall business. The second recommendation would be to pay attention to the problem of misdirected emails. What we've seen within the pandemic is that they've increased. That's likely to continue. But even if COVID-19 hadn't happened, it would still have been a problem for organizations. As I've mentioned before, employees self-reporting on those incidents is not the most reliable method of gathering evidence of how often this is taking place. So consider ways in which perhaps you can gather that information and determine the extent to which this is a problem for you and the frequency by which this is taking place and happening across your organization. And then the last recommendation would be to review your existing controls. Look for areas of improvement. If you are using traditional DLP type technologies, of course, there's a place for those within your information security stack and control stack. But really consider the extent to which machine learning and platforms like egress can help you detect and stop these breaches. And that's critical, I think, the fact that using these machine learning techniques, we can actually intervene at the point in which an employee is about to make a mistake and stop them from making that mistake and causing that data loss event. I think that's very, very critical for organizations. So really consider the role that machine learning can play within your information security technologies to help prevent this problem from occurring. So those would be my 3 recommendations. So the last thing I'll leave you with is, if anything that I've just discussed over the course of the last 15 to 20 minutes or so has been of interest to you, and you'd like to discuss it in more detail, of course, at Egress, we'd be delighted to have that conversation with you to help you understand the extent to which operational risk in email systems is a problem for you, but also to discuss how we can help you protect your people during this pandemic and beyond. Please feel free to contact me via LinkedIn and/or via my email address, kevin.eley@egress.com. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this webinar, and I look forward to hopefully speaking to many of you in the near future. Thank you.